The Duke of Marlow was already holding the glass when the first mistake appeared. It was not a loud mistake, not the kind that makes servants run or guests gasp. It was only a name written on a seating card near the far end of the royal banquet hall. Lady Theodora Marlow. Dead women were not supposed to have seats. At first, no one noticed except the old butler. Mr. Vale stood behind the long table with a silver tray balanced in his hands, staring at the card as though it had risen from a grave. The card had not been there an hour earlier. He knew that. He had arranged the table himself. The Duke's new bride-to-be was to sit at his right hand, his widowed aunt to his left, the court witnesses across from him, the royal secretary near the foot of the table. Everything had been perfect. Until the fourth name appeared. Lady Theodora Marlow. Mr. Vale reached for the card, intending to remove it before anyone saw. Then a child's glove fell from beneath the table. Small, white, damp from rain. The butler froze. A whisper came from under the tablecloth. "Elias, you stepped on my foot." "I did not." "You did." "Be quiet. Mamma said we must wait until the bell." Mr. Vale's face went white. There were children under the Duke's banquet table. Before he could lift the cloth, the great doors opened and the court procession entered. Music rose. Candles blazed along the golden walls. Every noble family in the capital turned to watch Duke Sebastian Marlow escort Lady Isidora Vane into the banquet hall. Sebastian looked exactly as society expected him to look on the night he meant to announce his second marriage. Handsome, composed, untouchable. His black evening coat was embroidered with silver thread. His dark hair was swept back from a face that had made women forgive coldness for years. On his hand gleamed the Marlow signet ring, heavy with old authority. Beside him, Lady Isidora smiled like a woman who had already measured the house, counted the servants, and chosen which portraits would be moved when she became Duchess. She wore pearl white silk. That was deliberate. Everyone knew it was deliberate. Theodora had worn pearl white silk on her wedding night 8 years earlier, before sickness, scandal, separation, and supposed death had erased her from court conversation. Now Isidora wore the colour, as if inheritance could begin with fabric. The hall applauded politely. Sebastian accepted the attention with a faint smile. He had waited 3 years for this evening, 3 years since the letter arrived saying his former wife had died in a remote seaside village after fleeing their marriage in disgrace. 3 years of condolences, 3 years of whispers. 3 years of Isidora standing at his side as comfort, then companion, then something society pretended not to name until it became useful to name it. Tonight, he would name it. Tonight, he would announce Lady Isidora Vane as the future Duchess of Marlow. Tonight, the past would finally remain buried. At least, that was what he believed. The guests took their places, silverware flashed, servants moved like shadows. The chandeliers threw gold light across the polished floor. Mr. Vale stood rigid near the wall, unable to look away from the forbidden card. Lady Theodora Marlow. Then Sebastian saw it. His smile faded. He stared at the card for 1 second too long. Isidora noticed. "My lord?" she whispered. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. "Remove that." Mr. Vale moved instantly. But before he could reach it, the bell rang. Not the dinner bell, the chapel bell. Once, then twice, then a third time. The hall fell into confused silence. Sebastian turned sharply. "Who ordered the chapel bell?" No one answered. Another sound came. Small feet beneath the table. A tiny sneeze. Every head turned. Isidora gripped Sebastian's sleeve. What was that? The tablecloth moved. Then a little boy crawled out from beneath the banquet table. He wore a dark green coat with gold buttons, though one sleeve was slightly muddy. His curls were damp from rain, and his face carried the serious expression of a child, trying very hard to be brave. The entire court froze. The boy looked around at the chandeliers, the silver plates, the rows of astonished nobles. Then he looked directly at Sebastian. His eyes were grey, Marlow grey, the exact pale, storm-coloured eyes that had passed through the Duke's family for generations. The boy's mouth opened. Before anyone could stop him, he asked, "Are you the Duke who forgot Mamma?" A gasp tore through the banquet hall. Sebastian did not move. Isadora stepped backward. The boy turned toward the tablecloth. "You can come out now," I asked. Two more children emerged. A girl first, straight-backed, despite the dust on her skirt, her chin lifted in stubborn dignity. Then another boy, quieter than the first, clutching a small wooden lion against his chest. Three children, the same age, the same eyes, the same dark curls. Triplets. Whispers exploded across the hall. Sebastian's face emptied of color. He looked from one child to the next, as though the room had become a nightmare, wearing human faces. Then the doors opened again. This time there was no music, only rain and silence. A woman stood at the entrance to the banquet hall, cloaked in dark blue, her hood lowered just enough for every older courtier to recognize her. Lady Theodora Marlowe. Alive. The glass slipped from Sebastian's hand and shattered across the floor. Theodora stepped inside. She looked thinner than she had in the portraits, but not weaker. Her beauty had changed into something sharper. The soft young Duchess society remembered had disappeared. In her place stood a woman who had crossed years of exile, childbirth, danger, and betrayal, and returned with 3 children at the exact moment her husband intended to replace her. No one spoke. No one dared. Theodora's gaze moved first to the triplets. Her expression softened. "Leora, Elias, Rowan, come here." The children obeyed immediately. The girl, Leora, took her mother's hand. Elias stayed half a step forward as if still prepared to question every adult in the room. Little Rowan pressed against her cloak. Sebastian whispered, "Theodora." His voice sounded unlike itself. She looked at him, not with love, not with hatred, with distance. That was worse. "Your Grace." The title struck him like a punishment. Isadora recovered first. "This is impossible." Theodora's eyes moved to her. "No, merely inconvenient." A few guests inhaled sharply. Isadora's face tightened. "You were declared dead." "By whom?" The question hung in the air. Sebastian looked toward the royal secretary, who had gone pale. Theodora continued walking forward. Her wet cloak brushed the marble floor. Servants stepped aside for her, but not in fear, in recognition, as though some of them had known she might come. Sebastian saw Mr. Vale lower his head. Not in shock, in loyalty. A cold thought entered the Duke's mind. Who knew? Isadora's voice rose. These children could be anyone's. The little girl turned on her instantly. "We are not anyone's." The court went silent again. Theodora squeezed Leora's hand gently. Sebastian was staring at the children. Elias, Leora, Rowan, their faces were small, unfamiliar, impossible, yet every line seemed to accuse him with resemblance. "How old are they?" he asked. Theodora's mouth tightened. 7. 7. His marriage had ended 8 years earlier. Number. Not ended. Broken. He heard again the physician's verdict. Theodora was too frail to bear children. The old duchess's disappointment. Isadora's tender sympathy. The letters that never came. The note saying Theodora had fled to the coast after refusing the formal separation. Then 3 years later, news of her death. All so neat. All so convenient. Sebastian looked at Isadora. For 1 second, she did not look frightened. She looked calculating. Then she rearranged her face into outrage. "My lord, surely you will not allow this woman to destroy your announcement with a theatrical lie." Theodora laughed softly. It was a small sound, but it carried. "I did not come to destroy your announcement, Lady Isadora." She removed her gloves slowly. "I came because my children asked why their father was marrying the woman who sent us away." The banquet hall erupted. Sebastian turned toward Isadora. "What does she mean?" Isadora's lips parted. "Nothing. She is desperate." Theodora looked toward the doors. "Bring him in." A moment later, 2 footmen entered with an old man between them. The court recognized him immediately. Dr. Alaric Fenn, the physician who had examined Theodora before the separation. The physician who had declared her barren. The physician who had vanished from court shortly after her supposed death. Now he stood trembling in the banquet hall, his coat soaked, his face grey. Sebastian's voice turned dangerous. "Fenn, The doctor looked at the floor. Theodora spoke calmly. "Tell him." Dr. Fenn swallowed. "Your Grace?" Sebastian stepped forward. "Tell me what?" The doctor's voice broke. "Her Grace was never barren." Isidora closed her eyes. The room froze. The doctor continued, each word pulling a buried crime into the light. "I was paid to say she was, paid to recommend separation, paid to keep silent after she wrote that she was with child." Sebastian felt the room tilt. He looked at Theodora. She did not look victorious. She looked exhausted. "I wrote to you," she said, 9 times. I received none. I know." Her eyes moved to Isidora. "So tonight, I came in person." Elias looked up at Sebastian. "Did you really not know us?" The question was small, too small for the damage it carried. Sebastian opened his mouth. No answer came. Because ignorance did not feel innocent when it stood before 3 children who had spent 7 years asking why a father never arrived. Then the royal secretary stood slowly. "My Lord Duke," he said, voice grave, "if these children are legitimate issue of your marriage, tonight's bride announcement cannot proceed." Isidora turned sharply. "You cannot mean that." The secretary ignored her. Sebastian stared at the triplets. Then at Theodora. Then at the shattered glass near his feet. He had entered the hall, prepared to announce a new duchess. Instead, his past had crawled from beneath his table, looked him in the eyes, and called him forgotten. Theodora lifted her chin. "I request formal recognition of my children before this court." Sebastian's voice came hoarse. "And of yourself?" A hush fell. The question carried more than law. It carried marriage, betrayal, a dead title that might not be dead at all. Theodora looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I did not come back to become your wife again." The words struck harder than any accusation. "I came back," she continued, "because you are about to give my children's future to the woman who tried to erase them." And somewhere behind Sebastian, Lady Isidora Vane finally began to tremble. The banquet hall became a court before the food was served. The servants removed the first course untouched. No one protested. Silver covers were lifted from roasted pheasant and carried away, while nobles sat frozen in their chairs, too hungry for scandal to think of supper. The royal secretary took the head of the table. Lord Chancellor Merrow had not been invited, but one messenger had already been sent racing through the rain to bring him from the palace. Until then, everything said in the hall would be witnessed by rank, servants, and the sealed record of the crown. Theodora stood near the fireplace with the triplets beside her. Sebastian stood across from her. Isidora remained near his chair, though the space around her had widened. No one had asked her to move. They simply leaned away one by one, as though guilt were a fever that might spread through silk. Dr. Fenn sat under guard. He had confessed only enough to begin the ruin, not enough to end it. Sebastian's voice was low. "Who paid you?" The physician's hands trembled. "I cannot say." Theodora looked at him. "You already have." Dr. Fenn squeezed his eyes shut. Isidora gave a sharp laugh. "This is absurd. A disgraced woman appears with children and a frightened old doctor, and suddenly everyone forgets reason." Theodora looked at the triplets. "Children, go with Mr. Vale." Leora resisted. "I want to stay." "I know, but what comes next is not for you." Elias looked at Sebastian. "Will he leave again?" The question silenced the room. Sebastian flinched as if struck. Theodora's face tightened, but her answer was for her son, not for the Duke. "If he does, that will be his shame, not your fault." Elias nodded slowly, as if placing the sentence somewhere safe. Mr. Vale led the children to a smaller withdrawing room, connected by open doors. They remained visible, but far enough that the worst of the testimony would not fall directly on them. Only when they were gone did Theodora turn back. "Now, Dr. Fenn." The physician stared at the floor. Theodora removed a sealed packet from beneath her cloak and placed it on the table. Isidora's eyes moved to it immediately. Sebastian noticed. Theodora opened the packet. Inside were letters, receipts, and a small torn page from a household ledger. "This," Theodora said, "is what kept me alive." Sebastian's brow furrowed. "Alive?" "Yes." She lifted the first letter. "After I was sent away from Marlow House, I was taken to Briar Coast, under the promise of quiet medical care. I was told you had ordered it. I was told you wished never to see me again. Sebastian's face darkened. I ordered no such thing. I know that now. The words came without comfort. She continued. At Briar Coast, I discovered I was with child. Later, the midwife discovered there were 3. I wrote to you immediately. When no answer came, I wrote again. When no answer came after the birth, I sent proof. 3 birth ribbons, a baptism record, and one of your old signet impressions I still possessed. Sebastian remembered that signet. He had given it to her in the early days of their marriage, when he still imagined love was a thing that would grow if neither of them frightened it. Theodora's voice thinned, but she did not break. The courier never reached you, Dr. Fenn whispered. No. Everyone turned. Theodora's eyes sharpened. Speak clearly. The doctor's voice trembled. The courier was stopped at the Western Road. By whose men? He looked at Isadora. Sebastian turned slowly. Isadora's face went cold. Lies. Dr. Fenn shook his head. I did as instructed. I took the letters. I sent word that the Duchess had become unstable. I wrote that she refused all contact. Sebastian's fists tightened. I never received that report. No, Your Grace. It was sent to your mother. The room shifted. The old Dowager Duchess of Marlow had died 2 years earlier, but her name still carried weight. She had been proud, severe, obsessed with purity of line and public honor. Theodora looked at Sebastian. Your mother did not act alone. Isadora stepped forward. Careful. No, Theodora said. I was careful for 7 years. Tonight, I will be accurate. A murmur passed through the hall. Theodora lifted the ledger page. This page came from your mother's private accounts. 3 payments were made to Dr. Fenn, 2 to the Briar Coast keeper, 1 to a man named Garrick Voss. Dr. Fenn covered his face. Sebastian's voice cut hard. Who is Garrick Voss? Theodora looked at Isadora. Ask your bride. Isadora said nothing. Then from the back of the hall, another woman spoke. He was her father's steward. Every head turned. An older lady rose from the second row. Lady Marian Vane. Isadora's aunt. Isadora spun toward her. Aunt Marian, sit down! Lady Marian did not sit. I have sat long enough. Isadora's lips parted. The older woman stepped forward, leaning heavily on a cane. Her face was lined, but her eyes were sharp. She looked first at Sebastian. Your Grace, my brother's house has carried this sin long enough. I will not carry it into another marriage. Isadora's voice shook. You promised. I promised to keep quiet if no child was harmed. The room went cold. Theodora closed her eyes. Sebastian stared. What does that mean? Lady Marian looked at him with grief. It means your former wife was not meant to survive the coast. A sound moved through the hall like wind before a storm. Sebastian's face lost all color. Isadora stood frozen. Theodora opened her eyes, and for the first time that evening, her mask cracked. Sebastian whispered, What? Lady Marian continued. Your mother wished her hidden. My brother wished Isadora elevated. The physician had already ruined the Duchess's name, but when news came that she had delivered 3 living children, the problem became greater. 3 heirs, 3 proofs, 3 threats. Theodora's hand gripped the edge of the table. Garrick Voss was sent to Briar Coast, Lady Marian said. He was told to arrange an illness, a fever, something believable, but the midwife smuggled the Duchess and the babies out before he arrived. The hall went utterly silent. Sebastian looked at Theodora. Her face was pale, but she remained standing. The children were watching from the adjoining room, too young to understand the full horror, old enough to know their mother was hurting. Sebastian took 1 step toward Isadora. You knew. Isadora's eyes flashed. I knew your mother wanted peace. Peace? Yes, she snapped. Peace. Stability. Theodora had already embarrassed you. She was weak, sentimental, unsuitable. Your mother understood what you refused to see. Sebastian stared as though she had become unrecognizable before him. My children were to be erased. They were never supposed to exist, Isadora cried. The sentence rang through the banquet hall. Then she realized what she had said. Too late. Theodora's voice came very softly. But they do. The silence after that was worse than shouting. Sebastian's hand shook. For years he had believed himself abandoned, pitied, humiliated by a wife who fled when duty became difficult. For years he had allowed Isadora to stand near him because she made his anger feel righteous. For years he had let his mother's version of events become law inside his own heart. And all that time, Theodora had been hiding children who were not merely unwanted by his household, they had been hunted by it. The royal secretary rose. "Lady Isidora Vane, you will remain in this hall under watch until Lord Chancellor Merrow arrives." Isidora laughed, but it was wild now. "On whose authority?" "Mine," the secretary said. "And if you move toward those children, I will have you restrained before the entire court." No one defended her. Not one guest, not Sebastian. Dr. Fenn began speaking then, as cowards often do once protection vanishes. He named the payments. The false diagnosis, the intercepted letters, the sealed report claiming Theodora was unstable, the order to declare her dead 3 years later after a body was found along the coast, though he had never identified it. Theodora listened without moving. Sebastian could barely stand through it. Then Lord Chancellor Merrow arrived. He entered in a dark travelling cloak, reins still clinging to his shoulders. He heard enough in 10 minutes to turn the banquet into an official inquiry. Documents were sealed. Witnesses were named. Isidora was questioned. Lady Marian gave sworn testimony. Dr. Fenn surrendered his private journal. And at last, the Chancellor asked the question that turned scandal into law. "Lady Theodora Marlowe, do you claim these children as lawful issue of your marriage to Duke Sebastian Marlowe?" Theodora lifted her chin. "Yes." "And do you claim your marriage was ended through fraud?" "Yes." Sebastian looked at her. The marriage. He had not allowed himself to think of that. If fraud had ended the separation, then legally she might still be his duchess. His wife, the mother of his children, the woman he had been about to replace in front of the court. The Chancellor turned to him. "Your Grace, do you contest the children?" Every face in the hall turned toward him. Theodora did not plead. The children watched from the next room. Elias held his wooden lion tightly. Leora stood protectively in front of her brothers. Rowan's eyes were wide. Sebastian felt the weight of the moment. If he contested them, he might protect himself for another day. If he accepted them, he would destroy the version of his life he had allowed others to build. He looked at Theodora. She had crossed 7 years of fear to stand there. He looked at the children, his children. Then he removed the Marlowe signet from his hand and placed it on the table before the court. "No," he said hoarsely, "I do not contest them." Isidora gasped. "Sebastian," he did not look at her. "I recognize Leora, Elias, and Rowan as my children." Theodora's face changed, not with forgiveness, not even relief. With the first small sign that the truth had finally been allowed to breathe, Lord Chancellor Merrow nodded. Recorded. But before the seal could be applied, Isidora spoke one last time. "If they are his children," she said, voice trembling with rage, "then let him ask why she waited 7 years. The room turned cold again. Sebastian looked at Theodora. The question was cruel, but it existed. Theodora faced Isidora fully. "I waited," she said, "because every road to him was watched by someone who wanted my children gone. I waited because babies cannot survive pride, and I chose survival. I waited because I learned that a mother sometimes has to let the world call her dead so her children can live." The words ended the room. Even the Chancellor lowered his eyes. Sebastian felt something inside him collapse. Theodora took her children's hands and turned toward the doors. Sebastian stepped forward. "Theodora," she stopped. Slowly, she looked back. "May I speak to them?" The question cost him. Not enough, but something. She looked at the triplets, then at him. "No!" The word struck him publicly. He accepted it, not because it did not hurt, because he had no right to object. "Not tonight," she continued. "Tonight, they go home with the parent who came for them every time." Then she walked out of the banquet hall with the triplets, and this time, every person in the court stood as she passed. By morning, the capital knew everything. Not the full truth, of course. Gossip never waits for full truth, but enough. The Duke of Marlowe had tried to announce a new bride. His first wife had entered with triplets. Lady Isidora Vane had been accused of helping erase them. Dr. Fenn had confessed. The old dowager's accounts had been seized. The banquet had ended without a wedding announcement, without supper, and without anyone daring to say Lady Theodora Marlowe's name as if she were a disgrace. By noon, the palace gates were crowded. By evening, the Marlowe crest had become a symbol of scandal. Sebastian spent the night in his study, though he did not sleep. Every object in the room accused him. The portrait of his mother above the mantel, the writing desk where letters should have reached him. The locked cabinet where Isadora had once placed her gloves while laughing at his bitterness. The empty space on his finger where the Marlowe signet had rested before he placed it before the Chancellor, in recognition of 3 children who had grown up without his name. At dawn, Mr. Vale entered. The old butler carried a tray of coffee and a sealed message. Sebastian looked up. "Did you know?" Mr. Vale did not pretend not to understand. "I suspected, Your Grace." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "For how long?" "Since the winter Her Grace disappeared." "And you said nothing?" The butler met his eyes. "I said enough to lose access to the household office. Your mother replaced every servant who asked questions. Some of us stayed because we hoped truth would find a door back in." Sebastian looked away. Even his servants had been braver than he. "The message?" he asked. Mr. Vale placed it on the desk. "From Lord Chancellor Merrow." Sebastian opened it. The inquiry would convene at noon. All principal witnesses were summoned. The question of the children's legitimacy, the fraudulent separation, Theodora's declared death, and Isadora Vane's involvement would be heard under royal authority. Sebastian folded the paper carefully. "Where is Lady Isadora?" "In the East Guest Suite, under watch." A bitter laugh rose in Sebastian's throat. She was to be mistress of this house. Mr. Vale's expression did not change. "Yes, Your Grace." That was all. No insult. No comfort. Only the brutal simplicity of fact. At noon, the inquiry chamber was full. Theodora arrived with her solicitor, her aunt, Lady Marian, and the triplets. The children were not brought into the main room at first. They waited in the adjoining chamber with a trusted nurse, but this time the doors remained open. No one would hide them again. Sebastian stood when Theodora entered. Several nobles noticed. So did she. She did not acknowledge it. Isadora entered under guard, dressed in grey. Without her court jewels and pearl silk, she looked less like a future duchess and more like a woman stripped of the costume that had helped others believe her. Lord Chancellor Merrow began with Dr. Fenn. The physician confessed fully. He admitted the false diagnosis. He admitted accepting payment from the late Dowager Duchess and Vane accounts. He admitted receiving Theodora's letters and passing them to Isadora's intermediary. He admitted signing a false death report after a coastal accident claimed an unknown woman. "Why declare her dead?" the Chancellor asked. Fenn's voice shook, "Because Lady Isadora wished to marry the Duke." Every eye turned. Isadora lifted her chin, but her lips were pale. The Chancellor turned to her. "Did you know Lady Theodora Marlowe lived?" Isadora was silent. "Answer." "Yes." A murmur moved through the chamber. Sebastian closed his eyes. A single word had ended the last possible doubt. The Chancellor continued. "Did you know she had borne children?" Isadora's face tightened. "Yes." Theodora looked down at her hands. Sebastian felt his guilt deepen into something almost unbearable. "And did you assist in suppressing that knowledge?" Isadora's composure snapped. "I assisted in protecting the Duke from disgrace." Theodora looked up. "From his children," she said. Isadora turned on her. "From you." Theodora did not flinch. That seemed to enrage Isadora more than any argument. "You think entering with those children makes you noble? You hid them too. I kept them alive. You kept them useful." Sebastian stepped forward. "Enough." The word left him before thought. The room turned. Isadora stared at him. "You defend her now." "No," Sebastian said. "I defend the children you tried to erase." Theodora's eyes moved to him for a brief moment, then away. The Chancellor called Lady Marian next. Her testimony destroyed what remained of Isadora's defense. She described the Vane family's ambitions, the Dowager's hatred of Theodora, the payments, the threats, the attempted removal of the children from Briar Coast, the plan to wait until Sebastian remarried, then bury any later claim beneath scandal and accusations of fraud. Finally, she produced a letter in Isadora's own hand. "If Theodora lives, she must remain dead. If the children live, they must remain nameless. Sebastian must never see their eyes." When the Chancellor read that line, Sebastian sat down. He could no longer stand. Their eyes. Isadora had known. That was why she had kept portraits of old Marlowe ancestors turned away from the East sitting room. That was why she had once laughed when he said children in paintings all began to look alike. That was why she had discouraged him from visiting coastal estates after Theodora's supposed death. She had feared eyes, and he had never asked why. The legal ruling came before sunset. The separation between Sebastian and Theodora was declared fraudulently obtained and suspended pending full annulment review. Theodora's death record was voided. Leora, Elias, and Rowan were formally recognized as lawful children of the Duke and Duchess of Marlow. Their inheritance rights were protected under Crown Seal. Isidora Vane was stripped of any claim to marriage contract, barred from Marlow properties, and held for trial on conspiracy, fraud, and attempted suppression of lawful heirs. Dr. Fenn would stand trial. The late dowager's estate would be investigated. Every servant dismissed during Theodora's disappearance would be summoned for testimony. When the ruling ended, no one cheered. The truth was too heavy for applause. Theodora rose and went to the adjoining room. The triplets ran to her. That was when Sebastian saw what fatherhood looked like from the outside. Leora reached her first, pretending not to be scared. Elias asked whether they could go home. Rowan clung silently to her waist. Theodora knelt and gathered all three into her arms with a practiced tenderness that told Sebastian she had done this through storms, fevers, hunger, nightmares, and questions he had not been present to answer. He stood at the doorway, unable to move closer. Elias noticed him first, the boy with the wooden lion. "Are we Marlows now?" he asked. Theodora looked at Sebastian. She let him answer. His throat tightened. "You always were." Leora studied him suspiciously. Then why did no one know? The question cut through every title he owned. Sebastian lowered himself to one knee. "Because people lied," he said, "and because I believed what was easier instead of finding what was true." Rowan hid further behind Theodora. Sebastian did not reach for him. Good. He was learning. "Will you take us from Mama?" Leora asked. Theodora went still. Sebastian shook his head immediately. "No. Men say things," Leora replied. "Yes," he said softly, "and children remember what men do." That seemed to surprise her. He looked at all three of them. "I will not ask you to trust me today." Elias frowned. "Then what do you ask?" Sebastian looked at Theodora. She gave him nothing. No help. No permission. He deserved that. "I ask if I may write to you," he said, "through your mother, if she allows it, and if you do not wish to answer, you do not have to." The children looked at Theodora. She took a long breath. "Letters may be sent through my solicitor." It was not warmth. But it was more than nothing. Sebastian bowed his head. "Thank you." That night, Theodora did not return to Marlow House. She took the children to the residence she had kept quietly outside the city. It was modest compared to the ducal estate, but it was hers. No locked portraits. No poisoned servants, no dowager's ghost in every corridor. Sebastian sent no carriage after her. He sent no command, no demand, no wounded plea disguised as authority. The next morning, he sent 3 letters, one for Leora, one for Elias, one for Rowan. They were short, careful, honest. He did not call himself Papa. He signed only Sebastian Marlow. Theodora read them first. Then she placed them on the breakfast table and allowed the children to decide. Leora read hers twice and said nothing. Elias asked if he could keep the seal. Rowan pushed his under his plate and pretended not to care, then retrieved it before bedtime. That was how it began. Not with forgiveness, with paper. Weeks passed. Then months. Sebastian rebuilt what he could and accepted what he could not. He dismissed every official connected to his mother's household corruption. He restored pensions to servants who had been removed for asking questions. He created trusts for the triplets in Theodora's control, not his own. He submitted Marlow records to court review. He sold the coastal hunting lodge where Theodora had been meant to disappear and used the proceeds to build a school in Briar Coast under her name. Society expected Theodora to return to him. She did not. That offended people more than Isidora's crime. A woman wronged was acceptable if she ended the story by rewarding the repentant man. Theodora refused to become an ornament on Sebastian's redemption. At the Queen's Spring Assembly, she appeared publicly for the first time since the inquiry. She wore midnight blue. The triplets walked beside her. This time, no one whispered that the children could be anyone's. No one dared. Sebastian stood across the ballroom. The moment he saw them, he bowed. Deeply. Not to the court, to Theodora. The entire room saw. Leora whispered, "Why is he doing that?" Theodora looked at Sebastian, then answered softly, "Because he is learning the difference between pride and respect." Elias waved. Sebastian's face changed with such fragile hope that Theodora almost looked away. Rowan, after a moment, lifted one small hand too. It was enough to break a man if he understood what it cost. Sebastian understood. Later that evening, Theodora found him alone near the balcony doors. "You may visit them next Sunday," she said. He turned quickly, then forced himself still. "Thank you. 1 hour, in my garden. Mr. Vale will attend." "Of course. No gifts. I understand. No promises you cannot keep." His voice lowered. "I understand that most of all." For the first time, Theodora looked at him without the full wall between them. "You lost years, Sebastian." "I know." "No," she said. "You lost first words, first steps, fevers, fears, birthdays, questions. You lost the right to be trusted easily." His eyes shone. "I know. And I lost safety because the people around you valued your comfort more than my life." He bowed his head. "I will spend whatever remains of mine answering for that." She studied him. "Answering is not the same as repairing." "No," he said. "But it may be where repair begins." The first visit was awkward. The second was worse. The third, Elias brought out a wooden lion and asked if Sebastian knew how to carve. Sebastian lied and said a little. Then he spent the next week learning well enough not to embarrass himself before a 7-year-old. Leora asked questions like a judge. "Why did you believe Lady Isadora? Why did you not search for Mama? Do you get angry when people tell you no?" Sebastian answered every question. Rowan rarely spoke at first. Then one afternoon he handed Sebastian a broken toy wheel without looking at him. "Can you fix this?" Sebastian took it as if accepting a crown. "I can try." Years later, people still told the story of the night the Duke of Marlow was about to announce his new bride. They said the chandeliers were lit, the court was gathered, and Lady Isadora was already smiling like a duchess. Then a child crawled from beneath the table and asked whether the Duke had forgotten his mother. They said the ex-wife entered with triplets. They said the bride lost the room before the announcement could be made. They said the Duke's past came alive in 3 small faces with Marlow eyes. But Theodora told it differently. She said the children were not proof of scandal. They were proof of survival. She said she did not return for a husband, a title, or a house that had once tried to bury her. She returned because her children deserved names no lie could steal. And though Sebastian Marlow spent the rest of his life trying to become worthy of being called father, Theodora never forgot the truth that had kept them alive. A woman may be declared dead by a powerful house,